Hey everyone. So right from the jump, one little detail I love that's established with this episode and the last one is how Shuri and Ziggy kind of represent two different extremes. While Shuri wants to destroy all robots, Ziggy wants to control them, and then we have our heroes kind of stuck in the middle who just want them to live freely. It's like a simple setup for something like this, but it's one that for this scenario really works because it's basically our heroes like confronting against two forms of oppression really, and but more than that, I like how this episode also establishes that Shura is kind of playing right into Ziggy's hands. Like Ziggy is using the fact that Shura is kind of a maniacal nut job to get what he wants out of him, which is control the All-Link system to turn it on the Nero Empire and then the universe, but by controlling all robots, by controlling all robot kind as a whole. And the thing is, even though Shura thinks he's being clever by setting this trap, you find yourself more willing to put all your chips on Ziggy coming out on top of this one, out of this tug of war, because he's the type of antagonist who is so calm and collected that he just naturally feels like the one who's more in control of this situation than even when all they've even after all they've done is like make their opening moves with their good moves, it still feels like the Ziggy is the one who's more in control of this situation. um, with that being the case, however, the one thing I want everyone who's in anime only to pay attention to, not only in this episode but going forward as well, especially going into season 3, is just how reckless Shiki's acting, because that's one of those things where, just like the whole confrontation with Dragon Joe, it's gonna lead him, with the way Shiki's acting right now, it's gonna lead him to lose a lot more than what he's gonna bargain for by the end of all this. Like, I'm not gonna say what he's gonna lose or who's gonna die or whatnot, but let's just say it is one of those things where what happens by the end of all this, there's going to be no going back, unfortunately. Also, on a smaller note, I gotta say, the most real and uncomfortable part of this episode, believe it or not, to me, like to watch, was the news broadcast and seeing the varied reaction to Shura's declaration of destroying all robot kind. Like, it's one of those things where, yeah, this is kind of where you can't help but look at that and say, yeah, this is kind of the real world in a nutshell. Like, it's uncomfortably real in a lot of ways. Like, I gotta say, especially that, like, the most realist part was probably that religious nut job who said, we must free ourselves of the robot kind, like, and must reclaim our, I don't know, like, the whole thing that religious guy was saying, like we must free ourselves from the roboticized tyranny or shit like that. Like, he was basically a religious kind of conspiracy nut job, and yeah, that's the part of it that really got me like, ooh boy, ain't that real. Yeah. And also, I gotta say, those dice have really diluted Nero's common sense and reason. Like, if he honestly thinks things are going to go away, but things are still going to go his way by the end of this, yeah, I got another thing. I got a bridge to sell you, Nero. Like, I'm sorry to say, but you're not the one in control of this situation as much as you like to think. With that said, this episode does a little bit of reorganizing of how events play out, as rather than ultimately cutting to our heroes on Sandra and then having the flashback of Laguna telling the crew of what their next course of action should be from the manga, the anime kind of streamlines a lot of it by basically cutting out the idea of it being of the whole conversation with Laguna being a flashback entirely, and just having the conversation with Laguna happen immediately after Shura's broadcast. And knowing what I know, and honestly, I know it's probably like a standard operating procedure to do stuff like this in anime production, but I do really like these little changes that the anime adaptation does make it, as it not only streamlines and gives it more of a flow, but I also think it does build up the mystique just a little bit better of how Laguna knows more about what's going on and more about the people who can help him than what he's letting on. And as well as those the threat they're up against, leading into the reveal that these allies that they're recruiting are a rebel faction of Sandra, led by the big cat guy we saw in the intro, simply known as Goodwin. And yeah, honestly, even now, I'm not sure what to think about Goodwin's personality shifts. I'm not sure what to think about Goodwin and how his personality shifts from being a serious and stoic leader to a total fanboy when meeting Rebecca. Like, it's one of those rare. As much as I've been able to put up with a lot of Mashma's whole character and personality heel turns. This is the one that feels like too much of a heel turn. At least when talking about a first meeting, it feels like this one this should have happened a little bit later after meeting him or something. But it's like, because it happens immediately upon meeting him, I'm like, okay, I kind of lost me a little bit there. Like I had, and yeah, and aside from. And yeah, just like with the manga though, this episode is an interesting example of taking a character I had absolutely no attachment to and suddenly making him more interesting. Like when Mashima first reintroduced Laguna into the story, for the longest time I was asking, why him of all people? What angle are you playing here, Mashima? Why are you bringing him back? But by the point we basically did get to Sandra, suddenly that interest in his character took a major heel turn for me, and whether intentionally or not, it did get me curious of what Laguna's history was with these people. How do you go from being a member of a rebel army to one of Drakenjo's flunkies? And what's revealed and as far as like what's revealed into this context, as well as how Mashima fleshes Laguna out, like, it's one of those things where to Mashima's credit, he goes pretty damn hard in terms of showing the tragedy of Laguna's character and just his story. Because trust me when I say it, Laguna's like story is very tragic. It is like the man has lost way more than we think he has, and yeah. But now, I do admit one thing I wasn't a big fan of when we first go to the rebel hideout and we meet Ibaraki, because and I know what I'm about to say sounds like a nitpick, but it is still something that does kind of like weird me out a bit, which is to say that Ibaraki in the manga has this vocal tick of saying ifin or ifin so as part of his vocabulary, which I kind of get why they remove that, but I think it does. I think by removing that, just that little piece of dialogue, it does remove a little bit of a unique trait from the character himself. Now, on the flip side to that, though, I like how within the very short introductory segment of being on Sandra, we get so much character of the planet itself. Like, it's very easy to kind of just say it's a desert planet, but that just through introduction of like a simple creature like the camelfish or whatever it is, it already gives it so much more of an identity. And yeah, outside of that, there's not a whole lot more to talk about. Although I do gotta say that with that little battle sequence near the end, I like how there's still quite a few visual bits of story being told to us. Like, for example, the fact that Rebecca saved the child from the armored car, but revealed he's an Empire loyalist, like, and it definitely has some uncomfortable implications of there might be a couple child soldiers in the faction of the army that Shura controls, or maybe even within the army itself as a whole, and that one, or even that one altercation between the robots and that soldier, that Shura's that kind of reveals that Shura's kind of already an evil piece of shit, but there's kind of this corruption within the military itself that's been held off, I guess, for quite some time by Nero. That like that unfortunately a lot of the military does kind of agree with basically does kind of agree with the sentiment that from Shuro is peddling, like that all robots need to be destroyed. And And it doesn't matter whether the robots didn't question or hostile or not. Like it's a total indiscriminate purge. And on top of all of that, it was on top of all that as well. It was just really nice seeing everyone's abilities, like Rebecca having greater control over time, Pino being able to control who's affected by her EMP, or even just something as simple as Weiss and Shiki showing how much the control over their ether gear has improved. Like little things like that just really add to it. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Analyst Crunchyroll, be sure to notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just share the video around, guys. Dark Knight with me, signing off. Later, everyone.